India is getting back to work after staying under lockdown for 75 long days. Malls, hotels, restaurants, places of worship are reopening in some states according to central guidelines of safety measures. What's open now and what remains shut, that depends entirely on respective state governments, which have been given, of course, a free hand to decide the reopening strategy. For instance, Maharashtra itself has not allowed malls to open. Restaurants too can only do home delivery and takeaways, but shops have started opening. Delhi has loosened many more rules and their malls and restaurants can also open, but banquet halls remain shut. But the point is, you can shop. That's very important, and that was very important for the auto sector, which accounts for a large part of India's manufacturing piece, auto and auto ancillaries. And therefore, to tell us from the manufacturing standpoint what all this opening has meant and whether we are really like 90% back to work, joining me is the Managing Director of Bajaj Auto, Rajiv Bajaj. Rajiv, pleasure having you with us. Not just because you represent India Inc., but also you are citizen number one. You have spoken eloquently about how the lockdown strategy was all wrong and it flattened the GDP curve rather than the COVID curve. But now we are getting back to work. Can you just describe to me how the situation is at your end? Logistics, spare parts, what percentage is functioning, and what are your retailers saying?
Yeah, hi Latha. I think the one word that best captures it is uncertain, because things change every day. So the short answer to what capacity are we working at would be about 50%, I would say, overall. The short answer to how many people can come back to work is 100%. But of course, we are not getting everybody back to work because we don't need everyone there at this time. Having said that, things change on a daily basis. The definition of containment zones, the people taking actions locally to allow things to move or not, irrespective of what the state government may have said, and therefore the impact it has on suppliers and on our own people coming to work is quite considerable. So some days are better, some days are not. And as I've said before, there is unfortunately not one kind of aligned, concerted movement towards opening up. It is still, in a stop-start mode. And I'm not surprised that it is so, because the rhythm has been disrupted for so long that it is bound to take some time before we are functioning smoothly as before. This is true also in terms of shipments, whether it is to the domestic market and even to exports, in terms of containers, in terms of trucks, in terms of things being stuck at ports, in terms of ships not being available when they were supposed to be available. So on the whole, it is quite uncertain, quite chaotic right now.
Oh, yes. What is your ask in terms of these administrative ironing out that needs to be done?
Latha, more than the administrative ironing out, and of course, these are the things, in terms of movement of people, movement of goods, inbound, outbound, that has to be the focus of the government's attention to make sure that these are smoothened out and that everybody, does as they are told down the line. So they have to get the execution right. But I would say, I would put it across in this way, that for me right now, the lesser problem is the flu virus, and the bigger problem is the fear virus. Because everybody, it doesn't matter how educated they are or otherwise, it doesn't matter how senior and well off they are or otherwise, there is just such a fear psychosis in society right now, not just in terms of opening up businesses and going to work, but even in terms of people, in terms of their personal lives, in terms of meeting other people and the social and emotional aspects of that, that it is going to take a lot of straight talking in my view, with some simple, straightforward data and logic, uh, for the people to be told that they can be confident about getting on with life as normal. Because although both the center and state governments have started talking about living with the virus, but on the ground the fear is very, very deep rooted. I can give you many examples. For example, uh, the villages or the rural areas that our workmen come from, they get just clamped down by the local sarpanches, etc. And the authorities are not able to do much about it. And frankly, it is leading not only to a lot of disruption and distress, then it is leading to malpractices, to corruption, and to other things like that. So the most important thing right now is to remove this fear virus from the minds of people, so that the people that need to work feel confident about going to work.
Well, you're absolutely right. We have to get the communication right, and probably to ensure discipline in the initial weeks. The political messaging went overboard on scaring people out, scaring the daylights out, and now not just sarpanches. Why building societies in Mumbai can be so difficult and unreasonable. Police can be so unreasonable. I mean, why can't you go for a walk, for instance, as you pointed out in a previous interview? So now, while, of course, building societies and sarpanches have to be dealt with in terms of political messaging, even the extraordinary police powers have to be withdrawn. So I'm asking you, what is the administrative ask?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's the police commissioners, the collectors, the municipal commissioners, of every city, they have to make sure that when they say that, for example, everything is open from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., it should actually be the case. And I would go one step further, for example, and say that, to me, it is not so much about offices versus malls or restaurants versus theaters. I have not understood really why it is that people who form the working population, let's say in the age group of 21 to 60, who, if they are healthy, if they are robust, why do these people need to be stopped from going about their life as normal? I have not understood at all.
Exactly.
Because all the data that we are seeing from across the world is telling us that unless you are very old, perhaps very young, or seriously immunocompromised, you really don't have much to fear. You're going to be asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. So I think getting the working population back to work with their minds at ease has to be the objective. And it should really not matter, especially if people are going to wear masks and keep a distance and all that sort of stuff, if they're going to exercise all that precaution, which people are doing, because, nobody wants to invite trouble unnecessarily. So under those circumstances, I think we should do everything we can. The local administration should do everything they can to get this message out that everybody in this age group of 21 to 60 should simply get back to work.
No, I absolutely agree with you. In fact, I can't even understand this 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. I mean, I really think I should be allowed to make that decision. In fact, that should be the safer time. There shouldn't be anyone on the road at that time. Anyway, I think I've asked you enough about this over-administration that we were victims of because of the fear psychosis. But let me now come to demand. Some shops were open even earlier, and now more and more shops are getting open. You must have had some feedback from retailers. There was a hope that more people will prefer private transport, and therefore two-wheelers could actually get a leg up. Any of this that you can, read for us, read the tea leaves?
Well, certainly we are seeing signs of this in our export markets, particularly as of now in the developed markets, which have opened up to a large degree. I heard yesterday from Stefan Pierer at KTM that almost all across Europe, with the exception of Italy, which is still apparently demonstrating degrowth year on year, but is catching up quickly as it is opening up. But otherwise, across Europe, They are doing very well. They have growth rates like 10, 20, 30% year on year. Apparently in the US, KTM is witnessing something like 60, 70, 80% year on year growth. In China, apparently something like 20%. So these initial signs are very encouraging from those parts of the world. This perhaps owes itself to some combination of suppressed demand coming back, and also perhaps some structural change of the kind that you have mentioned. Nevertheless, what happens in India remains to be seen. Till last month, we were operating at perhaps about 20% of our retail efficiency. I can see now that we are close to a little above 50%. So it is improving rapidly. This is both on account of more dealerships opening up and also on account of more people walking into the same dealership. But 50% is not 100%. So we still have some way to go. Again, I think it's the fear virus that is holding people back from coming and making their purchases. So we are doing what we can as a manufacturer to reassure people and to invite them in. But I suspect that we've got a couple of months to go before we can hope to come back to, let's say, 80% to 90% of normal sales. And the reason I say that is because we must remember that we've also had another significant price disruption thanks to BS6. So whether sales will come back in the near future to pre-BS6 levels, I'm not very sure myself.
Okay. Well, let me now come to the nub of the problem, policy. What can the government do now to ensure that we make fewer mistakes and actually repair some of the damage done, some of the lost growth? One of the big themes that has come out in various nuances is this theme of Atmanirbhar. When the Home Minister spoke about Atmanirbhar, he seemed to say that if 130 crore Indians were to buy only Swadeshi, then nothing can stop us from creating jobs and from good industrial growth. Is that the nuance of Atmanirbhar that we should encourage?
Well, I don't know what exactly the government means by Atmanirbhar. If, on the one extreme, as some people suggest, it means exclusion, exclusion of multinational companies or foreign brands, then obviously we know that's not going to work, because what's not worked in history will not work now. But if the government means excellence, and I would like to believe that the government means excellence, then I think that is the way forward, or at least that has been our way forward for the last 15 years. Because to us, excellence quite simply means to be world class, to be a global company, a company whose products in every sense are competitive across continents. And that's what Bajaj has done. From being a company that 15 years ago was exporting virtually nothing, we are now exporting almost half of what we make. Yes. So if the government means that Indian companies should demonstrate excellence, should be world-class, should be global, should hope to sell a large part of their produce overseas, I could not agree with them more.
Well, hold that thought, Rajiv. I have to take a break, but I'm going to come back and ask you the real tough question on what do you want the government to do now to right some wrongs and get industry going. We are back. Bajaj Auto, Rajiv Bajaj. Well, Rajiv, now to the question on what government can do. What do you expect? And, we've heard a lot about Atmanirbhar, and the Home Minister defined that as if 130 crore Indians were to buy only Indian goods, then that would be a great fillip to job creation and industry. Is that the way we should go about policy?
Well, let me tell you first what we need to do as manufacturers, or what Bajaj Auto did. See, as someone said, everything is created twice. First in the mind and then in reality. Okay. I think this is very important to keep in mind when one is crafting one's strategy. What I mean by this is that half the problem is reality and half the problem is perception. In terms of reality, obviously what companies like us need to do, for example, is to build superior products. And products are basically a function of three levers. The design or the styling of the product, the function or the performance of the product, and the cost or the price of the product. So these are the three legs, if I may say so, on which the product stool stands. And that is the foundation of being Atmanirbhar or of being a global company. However, we have learned the hard way that getting the reality, i.e. the product right, is a necessary condition, but it is not a sufficient condition to be successful on a global scale. Because there is also the other side of the problem, which is the perception problem. What do I mean by that? The perception has to do with the brand as much as the reality had to do with the product. Because people seem to use these words, brand and product, quite interchangeably.
Yeah, which it is.
And they are not the same thing. No. The brand to me is a product with a story. A product without a story is not a brand. It's a commodity. It competes on price. So when one is building the brand, and it doesn't matter really whether you are building it in India or building it in Africa or building it anywhere else, because you have competition everywhere.
Yes.
When you are building your brand, the three important levers there, the three legs of the stool there are: one, your position or positioning; two, your communication, how you send the message across through the medium of choice; and third, the consumer experience. I mean, there's a reason why Apple builds the stores that it builds. So positioning, communication, and experience are the three legs of that stool. So what companies have to get right is both the reality and the perception, if they want to, be able to compete globally on that basis. Now, in terms of what government can do, I think government cannot add value to any individual business. And I don't think any government claims to do that. It doesn't matter whether you're flying planes, or running hotels, or building roads. Government is not an expert in any of this. But the government can create a lot of problems, deliberately or unwittingly. And I have been saying, for example, in the context of the Indian two-wheeler industry for about 8 months now, that in one word, the serious problem that we've had for the last 18 months is what I call over-regulation. We have over-regulated our market to such an extent that today, the same motorcycle that used to cost, let us say, 70,000 rupees in September 2018 is now costing the customer about 35% more. A typical Pulsar, for example. And since two-wheelers in India are not a lifestyle statement, they are a breadwinner for the person and for his family. They are used to commute to work and back, and to take the family out in the evening, perhaps. So for somebody to have to pay 35% more in just 18 months' time, because three regulations changed one after the other in quick succession. Insurance became much more expensive. The safety norms were brought in, norms which do not apply even today in a country like Malaysia with a $12,000 GDP per capita GDP, whereas in India it is only $2,000 per capita. And the third one is the BS6 regulations which have come in, which are also ahead of what is happening in other markets. So these three together, have pushed the price up by 35%, and that is why industry was in degrowth much before we had this corona problem. So I think these are three examples of the kind of things the government has to put right, so that the environment is right for us to perform in. You know what Rumi said? He said, when the flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment, not the flower. So we'll take care of the flower, but somebody got to take care of the environment.
Oh, that's extremely well put. No, I was just going to ask you, these are actually low-hanging fruits. It doesn't even require legislation. It just requires probably extending regulatory deadlines to make them effective after 3 years or after 2 years or whatever is appropriate. But Rajiv, you don't have any ask, like we just heard from Sajjan Jindal, the steel industry is asking for a border equalization tax because they believe Indian steel is at least $40 more expensive because of, all the cesses, the environment cess, the clean energy cess, the electricity tax. You don't have any policy ask.
Well, I would put it like this. The situation for every industry is different. Now, for example, when it comes to two-wheelers, India is the largest two-wheeler market in the world. And it's not just the largest, it's also the most rewarding. So I think when you are already in such a market that gives you enormous economies of scale, you should not need so much additional support in terms of government policy. But, for example, I don't understand why somebody who's buying a little motorcycle should pay the same 28% GST that somebody buying a much bigger motorcycle or a car is paying. The government, for example, did the right thing, in my view, by fixing the GST for electric vehicles at 5%. And I believe that was done recently. So I was hopeful, for example, that if electric vehicles are at 5% and if the previous generation of vehicles is at 28%, I was hopeful that the government would find it appropriate to bring GST to 18%, let's say, to absorb particularly the cost of the BS6 emission norms. So that would be, I think, a very, very valuable intervention.
You famously said that we flattened the wrong curve. Now, what's your sense as you see India getting back to work and getting back to the shops? Do you think this is a 1 year probably fall in sales? Do you think that we are normalizing in 22? What's the gut?
No, I don't think anything dramatic should be expected in this financial year.
Of course.
I think we would do well in the second half of the year to come back to some semblance of normalcy. The first quarter is a complete write-off.
Sure.
I think in our case, the first quarter will be perhaps about 30% of normal. And instead of growing, we are actually 30% lower than last year. As I said, in the second quarter, I hope we are well above 50%. So I think if in the second half of this year we 80-90%, we should be happy with that. For us as a manufacturer, we can't do much in terms of pushing demand from the position that we are in.
Yes.
It's not like we can dish out large discounts to get people walking in.
Yes.
But what is really important for us to do is this. At the front end, we need to really sharpen our proposition. And what I mean by that is that I think this is a time when you can motivate people to come out of the woodworks. People who've been waiting to buy something for the last 3 months, or people who want to, move from public transport,
to private,
one
yes,
form or the other to a two-wheeler, to come out of the woodworks. If you can tempt them with an aspirational brand, which in our case would be something, like a Platina, a Pulsar, Avenger, KTM, Dominar, etc. But at the same time, you need to make them an irresistible value proposition. We have a Pulsar 125 out there. We are going to have a couple of other such SKUs out there shortly. We've also introduced a Dominar 250. A few months back, we had introduced the KTM 125s. So I think offering a aspirational brand at irresistible value, by which I mean not just price. It has to be a holistic perception of value, which has to be irresistible, coming from the displacement of the vehicle, its perceived mileage, and of course price, financing, etc. I think if we can sharpen our proposition, which we have worked on a lot for the last 2 months, and those products are rolling out or have rolled out, then I think that is definitely going to put us in a competitively better position vis-a-vis our competition. And the second thing we have to do, and which we have done, in the last 2 months, is to simplify the back end. So as much as we sharpen the front end, we have to simplify the back end. So just to give you an example, in the commuter segment where we had 10 SKUs between our two brands, the City and the Platina, we have now rationalized this and simplified it down to just 4 to offer better value, but at the same time to make the entire supply chain process simpler for us, for our suppliers and for our dealers. So I think this is what we have to do to put ourselves in the best position to come as close to normalcy as we can within this year.
Okay. Well, Rajiv Bajaj, we are run out of time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You started off as citizen Rajiv Bajaj and then managing director Rajiv Bajaj, and you're ending up as salesman Rajiv Bajaj. You did a good job of speaking about your Pulsar and the Dominar and the Avenger. All the very best to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Latha. Thanks very much.